Back tomorrow. Jon Wilner, the Wilner Hotline, joins us now. And Jon, at about 9:30 your time last night, the Pac-12 played its last athletic event, or ended its last athletic event. And did you have moments of like, well, this is finally over? Thoughts on that? As a matter of fact, when I texted you this morning, you thought Oregon had won because they were in control of that game.
The last I saw, wasn't Oregon up like 8-3 or something?
They were.
Yeah, man. Hey, college baseball is crazy. I have been, I've gone through like 5 phases where I thought, well, that's kind of the end of the Pac-12, right? I mean, June 30th, 2022, when USC and UCLA leave. August 4th, last summer, when 10 schools bolted, or eight schools bolted, and then there's the last Pac-12 football game, and the last Pac-12 basketball game, and then the last Pac-12 conference championship, which was the baseball tournament. And then the passing of Bill Walton was kind of an informal moment there of the conference moving on. And so I guess last night technically counts as the last Pac-12 event as we know it, but I've been through it so many times here that it kind of didn't really hit me.
Yeah, Jon, and is this the end? I mean, that's the question that remains, right, when it comes to Oregon State, Washington State, whatever happens beyond that. But, I see Oregon State fans, the baseball team does well. Hey, hopefully this translates. Whatever basketball success, hopefully that translates. What do you think ultimately translates or doesn't translate in this new era for teams like an Oregon State and a Washington State and what they're hoping to maybe create?
Yeah, well, I mean, technically there will be a Pac-12 conference because the NCAA has a 2-year grace period where you can compete with fewer than 8 teams. So, this football season, there's going to be a Pac-12 with two schools. Once we get to the summer of 2026, what happens? I think the best bet is that there is a reformed conference that has a bunch of schools from the Mountain West and maybe some schools from, the Central Time Zone. I think, UTSA, for instance, is an intriguing option. But that would be my guess. Then the question becomes beyond 26. What does it look like into the next decade? Do Cal and Stanford return because the ACC blows up? Does UCLA return because the Big Ten just doesn't fit? Is there a football super league that forces a lot of the schools to come back because they don't make the football super league, right? I mean, if there's a 30 or 40 school super league, I think USC, Washington, and Oregon are in it, but I don't know if anybody else is. So I think there's a whole bunch of ways that the Pac-12 could reform in some semblance of what we have come to know. But just on the immediate time frame, I think by the summer of 2026, there's a good chance there will be a Pac-12 that has a bunch of Mountain West schools and the Cougars and Beavers.
Do you think that will benefit them going forward? Is that just benefit those teams from the Mountain West going forward, or would that be just a Band-Aid until we get to a Super League?
Well, I think that both probably. There's the Mountain West has been around for 25 years, right? Even as depleted as the Pac-12 brand is, I think there's still more value in the Pac-12 brand than the Mountain West brand. And the interesting piece is the Mountain West TV contract with Fox and CBS expires in the summer of 26 at the same time that Oregon State and Washington State would have to reform the Pac-12. Those two tracks crisscross, and so the Mountain West schools are going to need a new TV deal, and the Pac-2 schools are going to need a new conference. And so I think that there's a pretty decent chance that you would see some kind of reformation with Fox and maybe CBS with a TV deal there under the Pac-12 banner. But none of those schools are ever getting into the Super League. The only question is going to be whether whatever they create then ends up with more company from schools that are omitted, right? I mean, I've seen that proposal that circulated a few months ago with the 70 permanent members of a Super League, and then you got the 10 rotating that doesn't work. I don't think that that's viable. To me, a super league only works if you've got 30 or 40 schools.
John, I know Brett Yormark recently talked to the folks over at Arizona, everybody getting prepared for the big moves this upcoming year. I know he's spoken a couple different times here in recent weeks. Has there been anything as you followed along with Yormark that stands out of interest? Obviously, anytime he says anything about business and being open, everybody thinks, oh my God, here we go. Here's more realignment. But did that strike your interest or anything else potentially he had to say to Arizona or otherwise?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been tracking Yormark in person or by Zoom 3 times in the last 6 months. I sat down with him at the Big 12 meetings in Scottsdale in early May. I was on a video call with him after the Big 12 spring business meetings 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And then last week, I watched his presentation to the Arizona Board of Regents. That's both Arizona and ASU's governing board. And, he is clear about open for business, but it is clearly not about expansion right now. His open for business to him means I am trying to find ways to get more revenue for these schools because, everybody's got a $20 million expense coming with the settlement in that House case, and he is trying to figure out ways to generate more revenue. I think that the Hollywood-style seating that the Big 12 is trying to do, I think that's one way, and there's going to be others. They are constantly trying to come up with ways that can drive revenue. And even if it's just a few $100,000 here and there, it matters because the expenses are going to skyrocket once the settlement terms take effect, which is probably next fall. But I don't see any imminent Big 12 expansion, on that end.
John, have you heard anything from Cal or Stanford that would have this last year? There was a time where both those schools thought they were in the driver's seat in the conference, and that nothing this bad would ever happen to them, particularly Stanford, just because of who they are. And look, Stanford honestly could probably find a point where they don't need any of this and move on, and financially they'd be fine, but they wouldn't be on the big stage like they like to anymore. But have they changed their view on what makes a conference and what kind of conference they need to be in, given that could shift again in a very short amount of time through no fault of their own?
Well, they certainly, folks on both campuses are clearly watching what's going on in the ACC. There's no doubt about that. To me, the question is whether they are actually taking material steps to create a plan B in case in a year or two the ACC does kind of break apart, right? Both schools were caught off guard by the Pac-12's implosion. They did not see that happening, and they probably should have. But they are, both of them, Stanford's got way more money than Cal, obviously. Stanford has more money than anybody, essentially, except maybe Harvard. But both schools have got, they look at things differently. They look at college sports differently than most of the schools that play major college football. And they have got to get comfortable with this new era. They have got to get comfortable with players on the payroll, because that's what's going to happen, right? I mean, starting next fall, it's going to be $20 million expense for the revenue sharing. And it's an institutional, cultural issue at both places, and they're not going to be able to compete at the highest level in the ACC or anywhere else if their leadership does not get comfortable with the fact that, hey, you gotta play by the rules everybody else is playing by, or you're gonna fail and you're gonna basically become irrelevant.
Speaking of leadership, Arizona State made it official with Graham Rossini as their athletic director a couple of weeks ago. What kind of shape is Arizona State in, you feel like, heading into this first year in the Big 12? And I know there was a little bit of unhappiness or a little bit of a pushback originally when they were going through with hiring Rossini as AD, but just kind of how does it feel around the Sun Devils right now?
Well, I usually judge all of it based on your football program. I know the Big 12 basketball is a huge deal, right? And ASU basketball under Bobby Hurley, They've had a good spring in terms of restocking their roster with the transfer portal and some recruits. I don't see them competing for a top 10 finish in the Big 12 in either sport. Football is got, they still have got the NCAA sanctions hanging over them. They're going to struggle on both fronts. Financially, ASU, leadership, ASU, both ways, they are different, right? Their president, Michael Crow, takes a very different approach to college sports, and they are taking their athletic department and basically moving it under the umbrella of the university financially. Now, we'll see what that means. We'll see if that means they can spend more, right? They're bleeding money right now. But is this move, this change, going to allow them to spend more? Or is it going to mean they're going to have to spend less because everything they do is going to be watched by the university? I don't have an answer for you, but ASU is just a very different place than most major college athletic departments.
Well, both, Arizona obviously has had more success recently. The football team just had their best season in God knows how long. And the basketball team is still a juggernaut. They still are who they are. But both, is it like a state thing that they have kind of problems with their budgets? Because, Arizona had their own budget crisis.
They did. They had a huge budget crisis. The thing is, a lot of schools out here in the Pac-12 have money problems, right? Part of that's because their season ticket sales aren't great for football. But, there's, 7, 8 schools in the Pac-12 that are heavily reliant on university support to balance their books. Arizona and Arizona State are an interesting situation, though, because they are in the same system, yet they have very different financial structures. Because ASU's got this massive online program, so they have no problem with revenue, whereas Arizona has been a very tightly run ship. So it's almost like two different financial models, even though the schools are in the same system, and it's much harder for Arizona financially to maneuver than it is for ASU, and yet ASU has still struggled because of mismanagement, right? It also gets back to management, and the Herm Edwards era was obviously a disaster, and that has set them way back. It was only 3.5 years ago, ASU beat Arizona 70-7 in football. And now you look at the two programs, and Arizona is beating Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl, and ASU is not in a bowl game and about to go on probation.
John, last thing, when you've talked about House versus NCAA a little bit here, when all that came down, because we haven't had you on the show since it did, are you, especially hearing all these, 80s and presidents, all said, well, we knew this was coming down eventually. Are you surprised that they don't at least have some plans in place yet, and that they're going to be scrambling until next year to figure out how to apply all this?
No, because it's college sports, and I don't have very high expectations for any aspect of it, right? Now, but part of the problem is that there's a lot of unknowns, right? Because we don't know if the settlement's going to be approved by the judge. We don't know if it is going to make the NCAA essentially immune from other lawsuits. Other antitrust lawsuits. We don't know what the Title IX implications are going to be. We don't know how the schools are going to pay for it. We don't know what's going to happen with NIL collectives. So it's this groundbreaking development, and yet it's not final. And I think that a lot of schools don't know what to do because they're waiting on these other pieces to fall into place, and that could be a long time, right? To me, it gets back to the fact that the agreement was reached without collective bargaining. And so I don't know how it can hold up legally, right? Because there's no players union. So to me, this is not the beginning of the end in this revolution of college sports. It's only the end of the beginning.
I love the way you put that, John. Not the beginning of the end. It's the end of the beginning. Absolutely great stuff, John. Always great to have you on. Thanks for hopping on today. And, I know that you thrived on the Pac-12. I'm kind of sorry it's officially over. It's kind of a weird day when you think about it that way.
Yeah, to me, it's just today was the Danny Hurley day, and tomorrow's going to be something else. And college sports it is crazy how it's now making news year round. And the thing is that all these developments affect all the schools, right? I mean, what happens in the Big Ten affects the Big 12, and what happens in the ACC affects the SEC and the former Pac-12 schools. So it's all interconnected, and there's no shortage of things to write about. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Los Angeles Lakers, once again, whiff on a big college coach. About once every 20 years,
right.
They do that. So
that's right.
Yeah. Jon, have a great summer, and we'll talk to you again soon. I'm sure something's going to pop
Smokey,
up.
I said hello. Thanks a lot.
We will. Yeah, Jon Wilner, one of our favorite guests, really has a